As we told you yesterday, the mega scandal, Canada's Watergate, called the Robocalls affair, that was sure to bring down the evil Stephen Harper, well, it just went away. For 3 years since the 2011 election, political extremists in Canada have had a huge psychological problem. They just couldn't believe that in their Canada, that Stephen Harper won a majority government fair and square. They couldn't digest that fact, that Harper was the normal one and they were the outliers, the fringe. So as a psychological coping tactic, they came up with a theory to help them make sense of their world. No, Canada did not vote for the evil Stephen Harper. He didn't really win. He stole the election. Yeah, that's it. Through robocalls, those automatic phone calls that when you pick up the phone, it's just a recorded answering machine message on them. Yeah, here's the theory. Follow this. In 31 ridings, the evil Stephen Harper used so many of these robocalls. Okay, here's the tricky part. Pay attention closely to the conspiracy theory part here. So Stephen Harper made robocalls pretending to be from Elections Canada. This is the theory. And those fake Elections Canada phone calls told people to go to the wrong place to vote. And then so many people went to the wrong place to vote, and those people were only Liberals and NDPers, mind you. And only Conservatives went to the right place to vote. And so while all these Liberals or NDPers were at an abandoned warehouse across town or at the cemetery at midnight or something, the Conservatives were wearing top hats and tails and sipping champagne and laughing about how they stole the election. That was the theory. Here, let the CBC tell it to you.
Now, CBC News has turned up voters all over the country.
The scandal involving misleading phone calls during the last federal election is widening.
Something happened to the benefit of Conservative campaigns.
Growing list of some 34 ridings all across the country where Liberals or the NDP allege dirty tricks, which tends to point to something more than a bunch of local rogue operations of which the National Party was totally unaware.
So the theory was 31, 34 ridings, whatever, some of which the Conservatives had absolutely no chance in, some of which the Conservatives would win no matter what. This is the theory. There was a coordinated, secret, illegal robocall campaign that depended on the stupidity of Canadian voters, and this happened en masse, enough to rig the election. And just because the media couldn't find a single person who actually went to the wrong place to vote doesn't mean the theory's not true. Yeah, it's crazy, but it's a coping mechanism for people who think the alternative is even crazier, that their friends and neighbors actually voted for the evil Stephen Harper. Look, don't look at me that way. This isn't my theory. I never bought into it. I'm just summing it up for you. I mean, look, there are always some voting irregularities in a country of 35 million people, but as we showed you years ago, right after the election, Elections Canada did a review, and they looked at all complaints and reports, and they concluded there were no irregularities that were big enough to affect any riding's outcome, let alone the whole election in 2011. But look, the crazies out there who have Harper derangement syndrome, they just couldn't take that truth. And by crazies with Harper derangement syndrome, I don't just include wackos like the American-funded anti-Harper group called the Council of Canadians that has received $1.6 million from American leftists to meddle in our affairs. I'm talking mainly about the anti-Harper crazies in the press gallery, as in the crazies embedded in major media outlets in Canada, like the CBC and in particular the Ottawa Citizen. As I showed you yesterday, since 2012, up to yesterday, these Harper haters have published 3,581 news stories about robocalls. That's insane. And the two most obsessive reporters out there were Stephen Maher and Glenn McGregor of the Ottawa Citizen, whose bylines appeared on about 1,000 stories each. I am not making that up. Those are statistics from the media database called Infomar. I went through some of these 3,581 stories this morning. Oh, the comparisons to Watergate. This wasn't just proof of Harper's criminality. It was proof that he wasn't the true leader of Canada, but a tricky usurper. But yesterday, it all ended. Elections Canada, which despises the Conservative, which hunts the Conservatives with a ferocity you'd expect from people with Harper derangement syndrome. They've spent nearly $500,000 in an anti-Conservative PR campaign in the past few months. These partisan investigators, who have leaked every rumor and gossipy tidbit to McGregor and Maher, who had eagerly reported those rumors as the truth, Elections Canada finally had to admit there was nothing there. Elections Canada is great at leaking anti-conservative gossip to anti-conservative journalists, but at the end of the day, after millions of taxpayers' money spent chasing ghosts, there wasn't anything to this conspiracy theory. They even had a retired Supreme Court judge review the case, and she concluded there just wasn't anything there. Here, let me quote from Elections Canada's Commissioner's report yesterday. This is Yves Côté. He said, "The evidence uncovered in the investigation is not sufficient to give me reasonable grounds to believe that an offense was committed." So it's not just that the Conservatives didn't do it. It's that there was nothing done by anybody. There was no offense committed to investigate. No one was guilty because there's actually nothing to be guilty of. Well, what about all those calls that Terry Milewski talked about? I mean, hadn't thousands of Canadians signed some online petition and sent form letters to Elections Canada and clicked like on a bunch of anti-Harper Facebook pages? Yeah, well, about that, let me quote, again, Elections Canada, "Certain factual elements could not be uncovered. In some cases, investigators were able to confirm that complainants received a political call but found no additional evidence of its content. In most cases, no evidence was found to confirm whether or not a complaint was called." There's this left-wing Facebook pressure group called Lead Now, anti-oil sands, anti-Harper, you know the type. They got about 40,000 people to click like on an I Hate Harper page and sent all that to Elections Canada, who then spent millions of dollars investigating. But none of those folks actually received these fake phone calls telling them to go to the cemetery at midnight to vote. They weren't complaints about fake robocalls. They were complaints that Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. Last quote. This is from Elections Canada. "The data gathered in this investigation does not lend support to the existence of a conspiracy or conspiracies to interfere with the voting process." I knew that, and Election Canada knew that before they spent 3 years leaking gossip against Stephen Harper. I showed you their internal report in that access to information request from 2011, but it was in their political interest to whip up a scandal. It was in the opposition party's interest, too. It was in the media party's interest, too. So for 3 years, the robocall truthers lived in their dream world until finally the Supreme Court judge said, yeah, it's all BS. And finally, Elections Canada had to admit it, too. I guess it's a vindication of Stephen Harper, but I don't think most normal people even got caught up in the conspiracy theory in the first place. So I don't think they were waiting for someone to tell them that the robots didn't steal the election. They didn't believe it in the first place. And the truthers, well, the fact that Elections Canada now says there's nothing there, well, that's exactly what they would say, isn't it? So Harper got to them too. This conspiracy now goes even deeper. I mean, here's an expert.
Do you believe in a conspiracy in terms of the attack of 9/11?
No, but I do believe that it is the first time in history that fire has ever melted steel.
Sorry, different kind of truther. That's 9/11 truther Rosie O'Donnell telling the audience of her show The View that 9/11 was an inside job, that never in the history of science has fire melted steel, etc. She's a kook, and no facts will convince her otherwise. We got plenty of Rosie O'Donnells in Canada, too. Here, look. Last night on the CBC's flagship show, The National, a panel of pundits were in mourning. They were lamenting that their latest confected fake scandal had gone up in smoke. Some of them, like Peter Mansbridge, just admitted they goofed. But not the leader of the Trudeau media team at the Huffington Post, Althea Raj. Raj went full truther. She went full Rosie O'Donnell. Here, take a look.
It wasn't a complete vindication, although it was a good news day for the government, but it essentially just said, we don't have the powers and we couldn't complete our investigation. We didn't have enough evidence to actually find out what actually happened. And so there wasn't, a clear pattern, and it seems a bit scattered around the country, but we weren't able to find out because we didn't have the powers either to compel witnesses or to follow the paper trail. We couldn't compel financial documents. We couldn't get phone numbers. We couldn't get audio recordings to actually check to see what people were complaining about was actually happening.
Did you get that big ramble? Raj says it's not over. Oh, there's no evidence, sure, but that's only because it's still out there. We just haven't been able to find it. We couldn't force people to tell us things we don't know, so we don't have any info, but surely some conspirator somewhere does. If only we could force people, unnamed secret people, to tell us the real truth, Harper would be exposed. Hey, man, don't be part of the cover-up like Elections Canada. Oh, and the media's obsession? That's unfair to say. Look at this.
I thought it was quite unfair, actually, for the commissioner to suggest that the media had blown this out of proportion, and it was because of the media that all these, erroneous people called in. The fact is, a lot of people probably received a call during the election and thought, oh, it's just an error, and then thought nothing again about it until these allegations emerged in the media. And then they called and said,
But we don't have evidence of that.
No, we don't.
No, but what we do know, for example, so you get a call on your cell phone and it's somebody offering you a cruise to go somewhere. Do you complain about that? No. Who complains about that? There was only 1% of the voters in Guelph, and that is with local media telling you that there were problems during, at the voting station in Guelph. Only 1% of people who received calls complained. So I think I don't know that we can actually look at the numbers and say, well, not enough people complained, and therefore, it was less than we actually thought it was. What is clear is that, things like Lead On, I think, was one of the groups that, had an organized campaign. They kind of perhaps distracted from people who, actually had calls. But maybe Elections Canada should have told people about this after the election occurred and not waited, and not used the calls that were 9 months old after they emerged in the media. So people would have had a fresher recollection of what had happened.
Oh my God. I could listen to that all day. That is full Rosie O'Donnell, fire does not melt steel. Did you get that? There were 3,581 hyped, exaggerated, and in some cases just plain false stories, making something out of nothing, and no apology, no contrition, no admission of being a partisan act, just a bleating, pleading that this isn't fair to people like here who truly, truly invested their hearts in the conspiracy theory for 3 years. She's hardcore than Elections Canada. She thinks they're covering up now. One last clip.
Make the link between the Robocall report that we had today and the Fair Elections Act, which is going to be possibly amended next week. A lot of the things that the commissioner said in this report said, we couldn't get to the bottom of it because a lot of these powers are missing.
She's still digging. She is still pretending that Harper is rigging votes now through the Fair Elections Act. She is still saying that the only reason we don't have proof of robocalls fraud is because we don't have a legal system that forces forced confessions from people or something. It's like that old joke. A psychologist shows those ink blot tests called Rorschach tests to a patient. Ink blot after ink blot, the patient describes something very sexual every time over and over. So the psychologist says to his patient, good heavens, you're sexually obsessed. And the patient says, hey, doctor, don't blame me. You're the one who keeps showing me all these dirty pictures. And that's my point. The media party, the truthers like Althea Raj, the absolutely obsessed Maher and McGregor, they're like that patient who sees sex in every ink blot, except instead of nymphomania, they have Harperphobia. They hate him. They see a scandal in everything. The long-form census, the in-and-out scandal, prorogations, robocalls, Afghan detainees, every story cooked up by the media party, every story turns out to be fake or hyped or exaggerated, and the only people who care about these stories in the first place are the media party themselves. They are obsessed with getting Harper. Althea Raj still won't let it go. She wants so much to believe that Harper says, that the inkblot says Harper stole the election. It's not just them. What about the Ottawa Citizen editors who let Maher and McGregor go on this insane obsession for years based on nothing but partisan leaks and gossip? What about the editors? What about the media industry that awarded them the Michener Award for Great Journalism? Will they rescind their award now that we know it's for a report about Sasquatch? What about the World Free Press Award? Seriously, Maher and McGregor, who I've never seen stand up for press freedom or against censorship ever, actually won that award last year for their robocall story. Huh? The whole consensus media, the whole pack of them, the whole mob, the whole group of truthers, they love their robocalls conspiracy so much, they gave these reporters every award: investigative journalism, public policy journalism, free speech journalism, whatever. It was that inkblot thing again. They just see Harper scandals everywhere, anywhere, and so they will award those amongst them who write the most about Harper hatred and whose editors don't have the sense to call BS on it. It is a joke. The media party is a joke. Sorry, Althea, you are turning yourself into a joke. Maher and McGregor, who claim to be the new Woodward and Bernstein, are a joke. It would be as if after the entire Watergate media scandal, the police announced, yeah, not only did Richard Nixon not know about it, but there was nothing to know about. There was no break-in. There was no crime to begin with. Woodward and Bernstein would have been a historical joke if that happened. But the media party soldiers on. It's about their obsession. It's not actually about reporting. They're a joke. So let me end with a joke myself. Here's my original creative interpretation of a robocall phone call from 2 years ago. I believe this effort has more journalistic integrity and is more closely linked to the facts than the 3,581 junk stories regurgitated by the Trudeau media teams of the past years. Look.
Hello. This is R2D2. We are calling to warn you about Ezra Levant. Ezra Levant is an anti-robot bigot. We have proof. You should see how he touches his computer in ways that are inappropriate. At first it was a gentle caress of the iPad touchscreen, but then it just felt dirty. He uses a joystick, if you know what I mean. Don't vote for Ezra. He keeps Googling the words anatomically correct robot.
Ladies and gentlemen, if Mara McGregor's false stories deserve a Canadian Media Prize, hell, that little cartoon with R2D2, that deserves a Pulitzer.